started with today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not to substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professionals before doing any fasting, changing your diet in any way, taking or adjusting any medications or supplements, or adopting any treatment plan for a health problem. The use of any other products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Any information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All right, and now we'll get started with today's episode.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri Lance, and I am here solo this week. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone here to bounce ideas off of and kind of get some topics going, but I have some things that I wanted to share, and it's been a bit since I've done a solo episode. Now, some people in our community have taken my masterclass recently or have been in some of my community meetings, and a couple of them have kind of dubbed me the analogy queen. Now, based on the fact that I love analogies and think in analogies all of the time, I'm hoping that that's a positive piece of feedback. So, what does the analogy queen have for you today? I have some analogies that I have been thinking about recently and sharing in our community and with clients. And if you are someone who benefits from thinking in analogies, I hope that some of these at least, will be something that you can apply in your own fasting journey. Now, the first one that I wanted to talk about, I think will make sense, but there is part of it that I may be stretching it a bit. And that is, I remember in elementary school, middle school, and probably high school, in various math classes, I think we learned this, that when we were learning different shapes, squares, rectangles, triangles, trapezoids, rhombuses, I don't know if that's plural, we learned how many sides or what shapes or how many corners or whatever helped to define it. And I remember learning that all squares are rectangles, but that doesn't necessarily mean all rectangles are squares. So, where am I going with this related to fasting? One of the big concepts that we emphasize as a foundation of fasting and healthy eating is TRE, or time-restricted eating. And I think of this as a rectangle. It has 4 sides, it has 4 corners. 2 of the sides are of equal length, and the other 2 sides are of equal length. So TRE is the rectangle. Now, fasting is a square. It is a certain configuration of a rectangle. And one of the things that I have been listening to often in our community and in my clients is that people think that they are either doing TRE or they are fasting, as if they are 2 separate things. And unfortunately, for some people, they talk as though fasting is the good one and TRE is the fallback, is well, at least you're doing this part. And I wanted to try to dispel that for some of us and encourage us to stop thinking about TRE as less than in some way. After all, it is the rectangle. It is what fasting, or the square, is actually shaped by in the beginning. So TRE is the foundation of fasting. If you don't have a rectangle, you can't have a square. So if you don't learn TRE and get that skill really going, you're going to have a harder time getting fasting going. Or you're going to have a harder time getting fasting going that produces the results that you're looking for. So instead of thinking you're either doing fasting or TRE, what if you looked at it as I'm always doing TRE? Whether that means I'm having 2 meals today, maybe 3 meals. You might be someone who eats 3 meals, 1 meal today, or no meals. These are all TRE days. On some of them, there are just longer gaps in between the meals. So from this analogy, I hope that what you can start to consider is that TRE is the base. If you're doing TRE, you're already winning. And then the next goal is to work on expanding the time in between your meals so that they become longer fasts. 24 hours, 36 hours, 42 hours. So that's the first analogy. TRE is a rectangle, fasting is a square. All squares are rectangles. Now, my next analogy, have to kind of roll with me a little here, and that is that if I were living somewhere in a century or time or environment where riding horses was the way to go long distances, to get from one destination to the next. So I kind of picture I get on the horse, I stay on the horse, sometimes I move kind of slowly, sometimes I trot, sometimes I canter, sometimes it's a full out run. There might be a better word for that. But I stay on the horse. I travel more distance that way. I get the results. I get there. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever ridden a horse, and I haven't in a number of years, and before that it had been even more years, but what I remember about riding a horse is there's one part of it that's really difficult for me, and the rest of it feels much more manageable and even enjoyable. And that is getting on the horse. That's the challenge for me. I'm fairly short. I don't have a ton of upper body strength. And in order to get up on a horse, I have to put my foot up into a stirrup that's usually, above my knee, press in with that one, swing the other leg over the top of the horse while hoisting myself up with my arms. At least that's how I learned to do it. That's a lot of work. So if I climb on the horse and I go 20 feet and I get down, guess what? I have to get back on the horse. And then I ride for, let's say 50 feet and I get off the horse. Guess what I have to do? I have to get back on that horse. I have to put my foot back in that stirrup and, lift my body weight up into that saddle until I can settle back in. And then let's say I go another 100 yards. Now I have done so much effort to keep getting back in the saddle, but I've not yet made a lot of progress. I see a lot of people manage their fasting like this. They do the hard part. They get started. It's Monday morning. They determine that today is going to be a fasting day, and they slug through those first few hours. They get through that hunger pang in the afternoon, and then they break the fast and eat. And then the next day, they're on the ground again. And they put their foot up in the stirrup and they try again. The point that I'm really trying to convey with this is that getting started, getting your system ready to fast is the harder work. Once you're really in the fast and you get to that point where your body starts to burn body fat and fuel itself rather than demanding new food or new fuel be put in by you, the fasting actually gets easier. So again, what so many of us get caught up in doing is we keep getting up on the horse. We go through all of that hard work, and then we only stay up there for a little while and we come back down. Now, I also think about this in relation to our food choices. I so often hear people say, I really do well Monday through Thursday night. Then it's the weekend and it's social. And I just want to have more options with my food on the weekends. I don't want to have any parameters about what I eat on the weekends. So what happens Monday morning? They're on the ground and they have to get on the horse again. Then they get going and they're up on the horse during the week and they're getting some progress. They're getting some distance. And then the end of the week comes and they get back off the horse. So what I'm really trying to encourage is don't make yourself work harder by getting on the horse so many times without getting the benefit of keeping the fast going a little bit, keeping the healthy food choices going so that you don't have to keep initiating from the very beginning each time. Many of us do this anytime there's a weekend, a vacation, a holiday, versus if we just stay on the horse during the family vacation or during the holiday, we don't have to work quite so hard to get going again. Now, in a similar vein, I was also thinking of something else that some of us could relate to as far as transportation. This is the way that some people drive. And if I'm highlighting the way that you drive, I hope that you don't take offense. Quite a few years ago, I was riding with a friend, and we were riding from where we were going to grad school in Michigan, and we were driving to Chicago. I think it was maybe a 4-hour drive or something like that. And she asked me if I wanted to go along for the day and go see Chicago with her. She had an appointment and then come back. And I said, sure. I had never really ridden with this friend, though, on the highway. And I soon found out early into the trip, and there might be a phrase for this, but the way she would drive is she would push on the gas pedal and we would speed up and we would get up to the speed limit or maybe a little over. And then pretty drastically, she would take her foot off the gas pedal and we would slowly start to slow down and start to coast a little bit. And then she would quickly press on the gas pedal. I could actually feel myself moving in the seat every time she would either press more strenuously on the gas pedal or quickly lift her foot off the gas pedal. And so it was kind of herky-jerky. It was not a smooth ride on I-94 to Chicago. It was a little bit unsettling for me in that it was fast, slow, fast, slow. So where am I going with this? Similar to the horse, I encourage you to think about, how do I put some pressure on the gas pedal to get to the place that keeps me where I need to be, and then really gradually and lightly let up if I start to go too far or too fast. Then every now and then I may need to apply the brakes to help with that slowdown. But again, many of us seem to do kind of a herky-jerky, I'm all in, I'm fasting really hard, or I'm not fasting at all. And it's in and out and in and out. And again, that getting back in takes more energy. Now, the next analogy has to do with dogs. And some of you know I am a fan of dogs and pets in general, but I currently have 3 dogs and I really enjoy having dogs. I feel like many of us who have dogs or maybe grew up with dogs, we learned some habits in how we interact with our dogs that actually isn't good for them. And what I'm referring to is that we learn that dogs, because they like food, that we should just give them food whenever we're eating food. We should give them scraps off the table. Anything we have left over, we should just scrape into their bowl. This might work okay if we weren't also feeding them their food at regular intervals. But what I often have experienced when I was younger and had dogs was that they were the catch-all for the family. Any food that fell on the ground, anytime someone didn't like what they were eating, I might sneak some under the table to them. And in reality, this isn't healthy for them. Because what tends to happen with many dogs when they are just kind of constantly fed scraps or fed too many treats, they gain weight. They're above weight. And what I'm picturing when I think of this analogy is probably about 10 years ago, I had a dog and I was at the veterinary office. And while we were waiting for our appointment, I saw a poster on the wall. And the poster was of two puppies born in the same litter. And the photo was taken from up above. So you could see kind of their profile from their back, their top profile. And you could see where their kind of ribs were, and then you could see their belly kind of went in a little bit on the sides, and then their back end, their hips would be there. And in the beginning, they looked the same. And then the next photo was of the same two dogs at age, let's say 2. And you could see that one dog maintained that same kind of shape, a little bit rounded out towards the middle, and maybe kind of tuck in a little bit at the back, what might be considered our waistline, and then their hips. And the other one just started to be all one kind of line, rounded line to the back. And then 2 years later, same image. One, you could still see that same outline, but on the other one, you started to see from the front shoulders, things just kind of went around the side, right up to their hips. It all became one flowing, almost like a rounded object. And then the final picture, and maybe this was age 9, there was only one dog. And it was the one whose form still looked like that early form, where it went from the shoulders, went out a little bit around the ribs, and then tucked in a little at the waist, and then the hips. And this poster really made me sad, but it really drove home the point. The dog that had not been fed scraps maintained its appropriate kind of level of health and weight, while the other one did not. It kept growing larger and getting more overweight, and then it wasn't there. So this, of course, made me think a little bit more about dogs and feeding. And some of you might have dogs, and based on your dog's drive for food, what works and what doesn't work. But I have dogs that need to be fed at specific times. I have one dog that is very, very food focused. If he thinks another dog was fed in the other room, he dashes into that room to see if there's a bowl in there. Very food focused. Now imagine if, out of convenience, and because he likes food, if I just put out a big bowl of food every day and just kept filling it whenever it got empty, free feeding him basically. Imagine what would happen to him. His body can't manage that, and his brain can't manage that. He is compulsive about his eating. Now, I have one dog that probably could have done okay with free feeding, but she has brothers that would definitely go and eat her food. So free feeding for many dogs is not the healthiest option. They don't have kind of a turn off valve that lets them know that's enough. So just like us and what we're working on in our fasting and healthy eating journey, free feeding generally is not the approach that leaves our body in that form that we want it to be and our health in the version that we want that to be. We have specific meal times. My dogs get fed first thing in the morning and then at about 4:30. Now, if I don't feed them and it's 4:45, trust me, I am hearing feedback about that. They do not like fasting any longer than that. But the reality is, I manage their health and their weight by having set meal times for them. No snacking, no grazing. They do TRE. They do 2 meals a day. Now, the last one that I want to go over has to do with fasting aids or training wheels. And this is already an analogy, training wheels, meaning your 5-year-old wants to ride a bike, and so you put training wheels on their bike. And I know from a recent conversation that Coach Heather and I had, sometimes people within our community and sometimes listeners might feel a little confused by the messaging. We tell them, go ahead, use fasting aids, use training wheels, but don't use fasting aids or training wheels. And they're really confused. What should I do? Use them, not use them? And so I thought of a couple of other analogies outside of the training wheel example. Now, some of you know that I am a fairly new skier and I am 55. So learning to ski at age 55 has been a little bit of a challenge for me. But one of the things that I observe in my own journey of learning to ski is watching young kids learn to ski. And of course, I wish I had learned at a very young age. They don't have as far to fall. They're not as afraid to fall. And they just seem kind of fearless to me. But they also learn it at a time where those movements seem a little more natural to them. But when I watch the really young ones, the very beginning ones, you may already know this if you've spent any time on a ski mountain, but those little ones are with a parent and they have some tools to help them. One, they have about a 6 to 8 inch little rope that connects onto the tips of their skis. So it basically holds those skis together. So their skis aren't pointing directionally opposite each other. They're not crossing each other, but they're being kept within that range where they should be. So that automatically starts to guide them in their ski skill development. Now, some of them are also on a little bit of a harness with a parent behind them so that the kid doesn't take off, doesn't go flying off the trail, doesn't go too fast, doesn't get out of control. They're kind of managed in that their parent is behind them with this attachment, kind of helping keep them going where they need to go and keep them from being out of control. Another example is a trapeze artist. I know some people who have taken trapeze as learning a new skill, a new art, definitely good for building body strength and confidence and maybe tackling some fears. But if you imagine, and maybe you've done this, in the beginning, you're connected to a harness. So you swing from this post on the trapeze stand to the next stand. And you just swing until you can land on that other one. But you have a harness with the cords holding you. You're kind of being held in. You also have the net that is underneath you to catch you if you fall. And then as you get better at it, you start to learn new skills. You're going to do a flip or a twirl. You're going to do this. You're going to kind of swing from this trapeze to the next. And again, you have a harness and the net to catch you in case that new move doesn't go really well, in case you need that additional support. That's what fasting aids are. They are these things to help guide us and keep us going in the direction that we want to go, like that little tyke with the little connector on their skis, or like that beginning trapeze artist being held in place with a harness and having a net beneath them as they're learning their new skills. Now, eventually, as they develop more, these little kids don't have the connector on their skis. They don't have a parent with the kind of tow rope coming behind them. And the trapeze artist no longer needs a harness once they get really competent and confident with those new skills. So as you think about using fasting aids, they really are there to help you build your skill, help you build that fasting muscle. But once you have that fasting muscle well in place, you want to let go of fasting aids. And then you might only need them when you're learning a new skill. Let's say, for example, you're going for a longer fast than what you have been doing. If I've been doing 24-hour fasts and I decide I'm going to stretch it and start doing overnights into 42 hours, I might bring the fasting aid back to help me get through that new skill. I might also use a fasting aid when I'm just not at my peak performance. So let's just say, for example, my sleep has been disrupted and I'm just not quite as confident that I can complete my fast. It's a great time to pull out a fasting aid, have some bone broth, have some olive juice, something that can kind of boost me along. And once I feel really into it again and back up to my normal level, then I can go ahead and let go of that fasting aid again. Now, some of you may have listened and you can't relate to any of these analogies, or maybe you're just not an analogy person. But I hope that these images helped you kind of reflect on how you think about fasting, how you think about TRE, how you think about eating, how you think about keeping steady involvement, steady engagement versus start and stop, and how to use support tools to help you in this journey. If one of these fits well for you or a couple of them fit well for you, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear how it's working for you as you develop through your journey. And I also invite you, think of your own analogies. If analogies are a helpful tool for you to kind of put a frame of reference around these new skills you're developing, by all means, become an analogy queen or king or whatever. Learn to use these images to help you develop how you're going about this process. At any rate, I hope that this Analogy Queen episode was useful to you in thinking about all of these skills that you're building, and I look forward to coming back again next week with another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. Take good care, everyone.